I think the perception is, if you talk to lots of people on green skills, they saw there's lots of discussions, but people aren't exactly sure. There's been a couple of recent research projects, World Skills and CCATF, that have come out. We know this, we've got to do something about green, but we're not exactly sure what it is. So what I'm trying to do in this introduction to this summit is really to perhaps give us some ideas to what that is. The United Nations has a set of sustainable development goals. There are 17 of them. In the UK, we're not going to deal with all of those. Our plans around climate change centre roughly around 8 of these particular ones, and we've summed that into a plan which has been called the 10-point plan. This was first announced when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister, and there's been no changes. It was written by Kwasi Kwarteng when he was head of BEIS, so hopefully it's still quite live and up to date. And it's got 10 areas that are important to it: offshore wind, hydrogen, nuclear power, zero emissions on vehicles, more public transport, dealing with aeroplanes and ships, greener buildings, invest in carbon capture, and protecting the natural environment. And really to make that a reality, and I think this is a good thing, there's discussion around how we finance all of that. Yeah, so green finance and innovation. I'd like to have included actually within it insurance, because the insurance industry, in my experience, is one of the ones that are the most difficult to deal with in terms of making the changes that are necessary for climate change. I think another useful thing for us to understand, and I'm using here the IFATE's way of describing things, that the implications and for skills and for occupational skills vary. So I think all of us have got the need to have light green skills changes so that we all understand what we are doing, what our contribution is to climate change, net zero, dealing with the implications of net zero. So there's that greening of our economy. And so 100% of us will need to have those type of skills and awareness and understanding. Then quite a large number of jobs, and we think probably at least 50% of the existing apprenticeship standards or occupational standards, as they're now being called, actually will need a fairly significant component of change. Come on to what that might be towards the end of this talk. And that's mid-green, as to use the IFATE's way of describing it. And then we're going to have some new jobs, new occupations, smaller number, maybe 5–10% of apprenticeship standards or occupational standards will be completely new. So that's dark green. Let's look at where the UK is, therefore what the challenges are and what might be the things that we need to deal with. At the moment, the UK is doing pretty well compared to many of the major economies. Something like 45.5% of our energy is produced from renewable sources. That's good. I know there's one or two smaller countries like Iceland and Paraguay that are 100%. We've got Norway at 98%. But most of the major economies are a lot less than that. America, Europe are all around the 20. China about 17. Middle East about 14. India's doing well at 40%, but we've still got a lot to do to get to 100%. And therefore, the government's 10-point plan is about bridging that gap. But there's another gap that also needs bridging, and that is there's an impact. There's an impact on climate change. Yes, if we move towards reducing carbon, that will be great. But that's going to take us another 15–20 years. We're already experiencing droughts and floods and the negative side of climate change. So the UK's changes, the things that we've got to cope with in terms of skills, are not only getting the country to net zero, but there's also dealing with the impact of climate change, which will be coming from the period that will take us to get to 100%, but also what's happening in the rest of the world. Not everybody will get to necessarily 100% by 2050. So we're going to have to live with the implications of climate change for some while, and we'll need those skills as well. The government in 21 published a Green Skills Task Force, and that talked about, there were three themes: driving investment into net zero and supporting that with quality green jobs, building the pathways into those new careers, and transitioning everybody else, the workers, into the carbon-free economy. And I won't go into the detail of it, but it's a useful report. It sets out lots of information on the numbers of jobs that might be created, or the type of jobs that are going to be affected. So a worthwhile thing for you to look at. So what are we really talking about in terms of skills and competencies and the needs? Well, a big thing comes from energy generation. We'll be getting rid of our fossil fuel power stations, more nuclear power stations, more onshore and offshore wind. The government at this stage hasn't particularly prioritised tidal, although parts of the country like Mersey and South Wales, Bristol Channel, are talking about tidal power generation schemes. And there isn't a lot of talk about solar, although clearly that will have a part within the future. So there's a big bit about energy generation. The things that are specifically mentioned are major shift in terms of more nuclear power stations. Got the first coming online at Hinkley Point. Sizewell B's working its way through the planning process. There's a lot more to come. A lot more onshore and offshore wind farms to be built, and a big element is hydrogen. Using hydrogen as a fuel. That's clean hydrogen. So big amount of change there. With it, energy efficiency, making our buildings more efficient, using less energy, and that has implications for construction. And there are big implications for construction. In order to build all these new power stations, we're going to need a lot more civil engineering and a lot more civil engineering operatives and all of the skills that go around that. A lot more advanced manufacturing and engineering, logistics, support, everything that drives building all those new different power stations, that are not fossil fuels. Big implications. But we also got 25 million houses that need to be improved and upgraded and made sustainable. So they are net zero. So big implications here for refitting all of our properties, commercial, domestic, and engineering. Big changes there with construction. Construction will be a big area in terms of it achieving net zero, linked with advanced manufacturing and engineering and science and technology around all of that. Move to electric vehicles and hydrogen vehicles. Commercial vehicles, certainly construction plant vehicles, will probably be driven by hydrogen. If you're laying the train track from London to Birmingham for HS2, there's not many fields that have got a charging point for a great big cat excavator. In fact, there's none. So that sector and the commercial sector will be going for hydrogen in a big way. There's also major part of what we'll be doing is around carbon capture. So it'll be capturing carbon out of various processes, including the production of hydrogen as a power supply, and then storing that carbon under the North Sea and under the Irish Sea. That's the two initial phases that the government is proposing. And we'll be using that carbon then for food processing and other things. So there's a reuse. And clearly, there's a lot to do around the environment, planting more trees, peat bogs absorbing carbon. So enormous sort of range of things. And that gets us to a lot more construction skills, a lot more civil engineering, manufacturing, science, technology. Those type of jobs are going to increase in number and change dramatically. So how might each of these occupations change? Yes, we will have new ones like, you know, a retrofit or a solar installer. There will be some new jobs coming along, but the vast change is going to come for existing jobs. You know, be that bricklayers or carpenters or construction concreters or whatever. We're going to see big changes, and those changes are going to come about because we'll be using different materials, we'll be using different equipment, we'll be using different methods with a greater use of technology. We'll be trying to be much better at using materials, less waste, more recycling, changing our practices there. And we will want every level in the organisation, from the operational level up to the strategic management through the professional, technical, supervisory, to understand what changes are needed. So you're starting to see components of upskilling taking place. And that upskilling is necessary for all the existing workforce, but we need to build in those changes in skills into the apprenticeships and the occupational standards as well. So a lot of change to come about, but I think we're starting to get a sense of what this really means and how it's going to impact right the way across the board in most of our occupations and certainly all of our sectors. Thank you.